In the evening of September 21st, the regiment commander invited his deputies, chief of staff communications, squadron commanders, summarized the results of combat work torpedo bearers and topmaster for the past day. Suddenly the phone rang. Major Saitakov here. There was a short pause. The regiment commander from time to time inserted, "Yes, I see," and we all carefully watched the expression on his face, trying to determine with whom and what he was talking. Finally, Fyodor Andreevich uttered a firm yes and gently put the receiver down on the machine. General Shuginin called, said Sitikov. He said that tomorrow the ground forces will launch an offensive on Tallinn. We are ordered at dawn on September 22nd to have in 30-minute readiness to fly 8 torpedo carriers and topmaschikovikami to strike at enemy transports, which are taking away from Tallinn troops, military equipment, and looted goods. The flight is our decision according to air reconnaissance data. What will we do first of all? Ivanov asked, putting a sheet of paper in front of him to write down the commander's order. Let's do this a little thought, said Sitikov. Squadron commanders to allocate 2 crews of the most trained pilots, navigators and gunner radiators. The other 2 airplanes will be allocated by the regiment's management. 1 group will be led by myself, and the other my deputy for flight training, Major Orlenko. All crews to arrive at the airfield by 5 o'clock in the morning. Regimental engineer to ensure the readiness of the machines to fulfill the combat mission. And now rest. Rest? On the eve of such a day? No, my deputy Major Dobritsky and I did not sleep, especially when we listened to the operational report from Moscow. It reported that on September 21st in the Tallinn direction the troops of the Leningrad front, developing the offensive, captured the city and the railway station Rakvere, and also occupied more than 300 other settlements. Our troops also achieved success in other parts of the front. For example, the divisions operating west of Narva completely cleared from the enemy the isthmus between Lake Peipsi and the Gulf of Finland and joined the units advancing along the shore of Lake Peipsi. We, pilots, were included in the report of the Sovinform Bureau. It was reported about us the aviation of the Red Banner Baltic Fleet sunk in the Baltic Sea an enemy transport of 4,000 tons displacement. In the Gulf of Finland, Soviet pilots attacked and sunk a German transport. How can you fall asleep here? And what will be the results of our tomorrow's combat sorties? Before the start is still a few hours, and I wanted them to pass as soon as possible. To the sea, to the sea, to the real thing. At the front, no flight is without risk. We even prepared for training flights to the range as for combat flights, because we never ruled out meeting with enemy fighters. The distance was nothing. The Chief of Staff of the regiment, Captain Ivanov, told me in the first days of acquaintance, as in June, during training flights, 4 messers suddenly fell out of the clouds, crept up at low altitude and attacked the torpedo carriers. They shot down 1 Boston, the crew headed by Junior Lieutenant M.I. Zheskov was killed. Even our recent long-range flights to reconnoiter enemy communications seemed an innocent stroll compared to what awaited us tomorrow. I felt an extraordinary surge of strength, a mental uplift, as if I was imagined to go not to battle, but to participate in the display of aerobatics, as it used to happen at the Air Fleet festivals in the memorable pre-war years. 5 o'clock in the morning. All crews are already at the airfield. Gathered at the control room. Regiment Commander Major Sitikov clarified the task, developed a detailed scheme of attack, tying it to the combat area deployment of groups, deployment of pairs, going to the target and collection after the attack. Once again reminded the pilots about anti-air maneuver and interaction topmastaviki with torpedo carriers, about caution enemy fighters could appear at any point of the route. Remember, our targets are transports, and bigger, of course, said in conclusion the regiment commander. Flag navigator Major Zavarin asked the commander for permission to give a couple of useful tips. Please, Grigory Antonovich, readily agreed Sityakov, knowing that Zavarin does not like idle talk, and he, who had the richest in the regiment's combat experience, will surely have substantial recommendations. Please be aware, began the flag navigator, that the enemy uses the fastest ships for troop transportation. Convoys made up of them make passages at a speed of 15 knots, or even a little more. Accompany them can not only patrol boats and minesweepers, but also destroyers and even cruisers. That's the basis for calculating the rendezvous. Understandable, right? And one more thing, he continued after a short pause. Our torpedo, as you know, vapor gas and in motion leaves a trail of bubbles on the surface of the water. Therefore, so that the enemy, even noticing it, did not have time to maneuver, it is best to set a distance of 600 to 700 meters drop. Major Dobritsky was the last to give the pilots a farewell. As always, he spoke warmly, heartfelt, and his words about the upcoming test of our skill, our endurance and our courage, everyone fell into the soul. The crews went to the airplanes. Chief of Staff Captain Ivanov quietly held me by the elbow. You, Ivan, look there. Be careful. Don't get in the way. I hugged him lightly and patted his shoulder. Don't worry. Everything will be all right. The weather on the route and in the target area is good, so. That's bad, I echoed him. It's good for picket planes, but we'd like some clouds on top. He looked me over, and my heart felt warmer. It's good to have a friend on the ground. Major Dobritsky developed a flurry of activity near the planes. Here and there mottled combat leaflets. Near party leaders and Komsorg sat in groups of people held conversations. Grigory Veslievich himself tried to go around all the crews to cheer up with attention a couple of warm words. And these words were very necessary for those who flew out and for those who stayed. Although everyone believed in success, in victory, morally prepared themselves for the meeting with the enemy, their hearts clenched in anxiety. Is this the last time? War is war. Boston from the front resembled a bird from afar, but only the matte shining cigar-shaped torpedo body suspended under the belly did not allow to develop the image that was born by association. The navigator, Captain P. N. Sazonov, and the gunner radio operator, Petty Officer Y.A. Volkov, were already preparing their seats. The mechanic N.A. Sterlikov ran up, reported on the readiness of the aircraft to perform a combat mission. My group was flying second after Sitikov's group, and there was still enough time left. I certainly believed our technicians, did not doubt in the readiness of the machines, but still, following the habit ingrained over the years, went around the plane, took a quick look at it. I suddenly felt some relaxation, apparently, rested still a little too little. I knew I should sit down in my seat in the car and everything would pass. I involuntarily remembered when ours were flying off to sink the Nazi cruiser Niobe, and I asked Major Ponomarenko whether he was worried. His navigator Zavarin grinned and said his excitement is only up to the helm. And indeed, as soon as I found myself in the familiar pilot's seat, to feel the elastic pliability of the steering wheel in my hands, all relaxation was removed as if by hand. A green rocket soared into the sky, the signal for takeoff of the regiment commander's group. One after another, 4 Bostons soared into the sky and disappeared behind the horizon. After a set time at the start flashed 2 more green rockets permission to take off the second group. I switched on the ignition, and the engines obediently responded with a steady hum, making the entire hull vibrate finely. Hand lies on the wheel checked the work of the rudders. Pads are removed from under the wheels. The left hand sends the throttle sectors forward, the plane swaying on the roughness of the taxiway, approaching the beginning of the runway. Behind me in the keel wingman. At full speed tested the engines, I release the brakes, and the long runway runs into the torpedo carrier. Without making a circle, I go out on the route. The wingmen are lined up to catch up. Now they go, tightly pressed against me on the right wing commander's eye. Repin and MV Remizov, on the left the wing commander G.A. Zubenko. Through the transparent hoods of the cabins I can see their faces calm, full of masculine dignity, and in my heart is born a sense of unity, pride for my comrades. I give them a thumbs up. Well, they say, we took off and are going well. In response, they nod their heads and show meager hand gesture that everything is normal for them. On clear September days, there is a lot of sunshine on the Baltic. The horizon line can be seen for tens of kilometers, and only some clouds hide it from human sight. Suddenly we get into a rain charge, pilots get closer to the leader. This is the rule. But the charge quickly passes, and the sun, having removed the misty shroud, again open visibility for many kilometers. Looking over the horizon, far to the right I notice the outlines of a small transport, hurrying to hide in the Finnish skerries. He goes alone, without a guard ship, and I do not want to miss such an opportunity. I decide to attack it personally, without disbanding the group. The transport meets me with rare fire. There are not so many anti-aircraft guns on it. It gives me confidence, and I, maneuvering, approaching at a minimum distance, firing at it from directional machine guns and dropping a torpedo. But apparently someone from the crew of this small steamer was born in a shirt. They were lucky. The shallow water saved them. The torpedo dives to the ground and explodes. The ship escapes unharmed. I attach myself at the head of the group and lead it on, cursing myself for being a boy. Why did I attack that damned steamer? Having discharged before the time, I am now almost unarmed and can only help the group with machine gun fire when attacking the convoy. What a shame, what a blunder. At least I drowned it. And so I lost a torpedo for nothing. My heart was scratching. I could go back for a new torpedo, but I couldn't. I had no right to abandon my wingman. I had to fulfill my combat mission at all costs. And now we have the same 4 bombs, but only 1 torpedo. The wingmen are following me in formation. Now they are all focused on the leader. We are approaching the area where the transports are. Now on the leader depends on the success of the battle. I understand this. It understands the pilots. Enemy ships are about to appear, and we will go into attack, not sparing ourselves. This is the law of war. This is our profession. All attention the sea. It is important to detect transports at the extreme range and favourably deploy the group for attack. And here they are. A glance automatically fixes the position of the hands of the clock on the dashboard. They show 12.20. Hitler's ships are 2 caravans. In the first, a few dozen pennants, a strong guard. I choose the second 3 transports and a tanker, and the guard here is Lena. I lead the group into the attack from the side of the sun. We've been spotted. A barrage of fire is coming towards us. Leaving Tallinn, the Germans piled on the decks everything that can be used to shoot at airplanes. Among the shells of medium-caliber anti-aircraft guns bursting here and there, fire trails of automatic small-caliber anti-aircraft guns and machine guns are swirling, intertwining and diverging. All these bright wasps sting deadly, and it seems that there is no gap, no loophole to break through them to the transports. On my command, topmastmen Zubenko and Remizov go forward, providing Repin torpedo attack. The barrels of their machine guns, aimed at the ships, choked with continuous bursts of shots. Together with them, and I throw Boston in a gentle dive at the ships of the guard, pouring their decks of lead. That's all I can do now, once again mentally cursing myself for the wasted torpedo. 2 bombs hit the center section of the transport, red flames erupting from there, like a volcano with a black charge of smoke, debris flying up above us. Repin attacks with a torpedo. It turns the ship's bow around and completes the job. Leaving the zone of fire, I pass over the very masts of another transport and see an officer from the deck firing a pistol at my plane. Well, that's not the worst of it. As it was agreed, after the attack we gather as a group and go to our airfield in the same order. Our mood improved a little. We sank the transport and returned without losses. However, it was not without grief. It turns out that the Repin's car was damaged by a shell to the landing gear system, and the right and front wheels were folded during landing. The airplane was broken, but the crew, fortunately, got off with minor bruises. On the ground we learned that the group of the regiment commander worked more successfully. Sitikov torpedo bomber and his wingman topmast Lieutenant Pudov sank a transport of 10,000 tons displacement, and Borisov and Bogachev 7,000 tons. 2 units in 1 sortie. One could only envy them. We are lagging behind, Comrade Major, depressed, although not without a teasing remark. Remizov. Don't hang your head, next time we'll catch up and overtake. I did not suppose that this very next time would come in a couple of hours. While the airplanes of my group were refueling with fuel, ammunition, hanging bombs and torpedoes, and the last procedure took a particularly long time, which I will tell you about below. The group of the regiment commander took off for the second time that day. Now, there were 5 of them with torpedoes, flew Sitikov, and additionally included in the group commander of the 3rd Squadron, Captain Meshurin. Borisov, Bogachev and Pudov took 2 half-ton bombs. Intentionally omit here the details of the second flight of both our groups. Everything was repeated as in a movie, filmed on a copied script, and a barrage of fire in the face, and daring attacks towards death. It is still good that the enemy fighter aviation, covering their retreating ground troops, did not show activity either on the route or in the target area. Having discovered the convoy, Major Sitikov made a bold decision on his command Captain Meshurin alone, without Topmastoviki, from the get-go attacked the transport displacement of 6,000 tons and sank it with a single torpedo. The leader himself, without disbanding the rest of the group, led it in an attack on a transport of 000 tons displacement, distinguished by its dimensions. Such prey was rare, and Major Sitikov correctly decided that the game is worth the candle. After being hit by several bombs and torpedoes, the giant quickly sank into the abyss. True, this time not everyone returned home. Enemy anti-aircraft gunners managed to hit the airplane of Lieutenant S. P. Pudov. P. Pudov, embraced by flames Boston, fell into the water. Together with the pilot were killed Navigator P. M. Bystrov and gunner Radiator A. G. Kramar. 2 direct hits were also in the airplane of Captain Meshurin. 1 shell punctured the gas tank, the other turned the left plane. Nevertheless, Meshurin safely reached the airfield. We learned about everything, of course, on our return. And flying out soon after the group of the regiment commander, we caught up with the enemy convoy far out to sea. 4 transports were going fast westward under the protection of a destroyer and a minesweeper. This is already a solid cover, which cannot be ignored. My wingman Topmasman Zubenko and I attacked the lead transport with displacement of 8,000 tons. Bombs and torpedo hit the central part of the ship, which sank very quickly. Great success fell to the share of our second pair, where Repin, who was hit in the previous flight, was replaced by the commander of the 2nd Squadron, Major B.E. Kovalev. Together with Topmasman Remizov, he put another large ship to the bottom. And my group did not reach Klopitz completely, although it did not come to the loss of life. Zubenko's plane was seriously damaged. The pilot went to the nearest on the route airfield Kotli on one engine and landed on the runway with retracted landing gear, as they were not released. He did it skillfully, the crew was not injured. It was only when I pulled into the parking lot that I realized how tired I was. The engines were turned off, and the silence seemed to hit my eardrums so hard that it hurt my ears. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to move an arm or a leg. I felt devastated both mentally and physically. It was a real prostration. That's what it means to go to torpedo attack twice in one day without any support. There seemed to be no strength left even to breathe. But then the familiar call signs of the Moscow radio were heard. Someone shouted, "Turn up the volume," and Leviton's excited voice sounded solemnly over the parking lot. The report of the Sovinform Bureau said that the troops of the Leningrad front, as a result of a rapid offensive on September 22nd, with the bays seized an important naval base and a major port on the Baltic Sea, the capital of Soviet Estonia, the city of Tallinn, as well as occupied more than 800 settlements. And fatigue was no longer pressing so hard on my shoulders. Preparing for the analysis of flights, Major Sitikov and I decided to carefully analyze, as possible, more bulging and skill and courage of pilots, especially young. Some of them this day opened their combat account, and it was necessary to instill confidence in them, to make them believe in themselves, in their capabilities, to sow the seeds of future successes. We exchanged opinions, and it seemed to me that Fyodor Andreevich was not satisfied with the results of my group in the first flight. I couldn't stand it and told him about the failed attack in the Finnish skerries, about the wasted torpedo. "But you made up for it in the second flight, without losing a single crew," as if calming me, said Sitikov. "And to sink a transport is not a word to say." And later, at the showdown, detailing the actions of the crews in battle, the regiment commander sought to show the price, the weight of the pilots' contributions to the victory. "It is believed," said Fyodor Andreevich, "that the usual train carries 1,200 tons of cargo. Transport of 5,000–6,000 tons displacement for one trip can take more than 3,000 tons of cargo, or say 100 medium tanks, which would require 2 trains of 50 platforms each. It can hold on board more than 1,000 soldiers with weapons and ammunition or food for 2 divisions for 3 whole months. Compared to transport this amount of food by highway would require 600 vehicles with a capacity of 5 tons each. That's what it means, friends, to sink such a transport. I looked into the concentrated faces of our youth. Those who took part in the attacks on the caravans had lost their boyish carelessness. They were becoming fighters. They were growing in manhood before my eyes. And those who had not yet had a chance to really smell the gunpowder frankly envied them. Some of them were sketching something with a pencil on newspaper margins, on cigarette boxes. And I guessed what they were writing. Summing up the results of combat sorties, Major Sitikov announced that the pilots of our regiment for today, September 22nd, sent to the bottom of the Baltic 7 fascist transports with a total displacement of up 55,000 tons. Surely the guys translated this figure into railroad trains for clarity. I've calculated it myself even earlier. No matter how you count it, it's more than 40 echelons. Yes, it's really a victory. The next day in the morning we had a rally. The regiment was lined up at the airfield. They stood in squadrons, pilots, navigators, gunner radiators, technicians, mechanics, closing the line officers and soldiers of service units. On the right flank, the deputy commander of the regiment on the political part of Major G.V. Dobritsky, Chief of Staff Captain Ni Ivanov, Flag Navigator Major Georgia Zavarin, Chief of Communications Senior Lieutenant P.I. Chakashin. And the chiefs, and all standing in the line of joyful, excited faces. In each unit, regardless of the type of troops, the soldiers' wireless telegraph works without interruption, so most of them knew that both the formation and the rally were connected, not only with the liberation of the capital of Soviet Estonia. The ranks froze in a blissful, light-hearted expectation. Major Sitikov came out of the headquarters and went towards the formation. Polk, humbly, 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 humbly. I commanded and went up to him with a report. Not often aviators had such a formation at the front, and during the years of war we had become accustomed to formation rituals. But on this day a sublime solemnity reigned in the regiment. Somehow elusively smelled on me the breath of my unforgettable cadet years, quite full of shagistica, and giving in to the general mood, I tried to put all my skills into my role, so that this high mood of people was preserved further. The commander began to speak. In the ensuing silence clearly sounded the words of the order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, which stated that our regiment was awarded the honorary name Tallinn. From now on we will be called 51st Tallinn Mine Torpedo Regiment. It sounded exciting and unusual. Major Sitikov read out a congratulatory message from the KBF Aviation Commander, General M.I. Samokin, and then said a few words from himself. Assigning the regiment the honorary name Tallinn, he said, is a high evaluation of the hard combat work of all the personnel. Thank you very much, dear comrades. With a feeling of great gratitude and deep sorrow we remember at this solemn moment those who had to stand in this line, but who today are not among us, who by their heroic deeds, at the cost of their lives, helped the regiment to win the honorary title. Let me hope, comrades, that in the name of the motherland, in the name of the bright memory of our heroically fallen comrades in arms, you will honorably perform your military duty, increase the glory of the regiment, preserve and continue the military traditions. All participants of yesterday's sorties were honoured with high government awards. Order of the Red Banner received and young pilots M.V. Remizov, G.A. Gubenko, M.B. Borisov, S.P. Pudov. Order of the Red Star were awarded to Senior Technician Lieutenant A.V. Zavialov, Technician Lieutenants P.S. Borisov and M.N. Kuznetsov. There were those who received 2 orders of the Red Banner for yesterday's operation and previous sorties. This became a universal favourite Junior Lieutenant A.A. Bogachev and inseparable with him Navigator Crew Junior Lieutenant N. I. Konko. I also received my first order of the Red Banner that day. Speaking at the rally, pilots, navigators, technicians thanked for the awards and on behalf of their comrades swore to selflessly serve their beloved homeland, to multiply strikes against the enemy, not to spare their blood and life to achieve victory. And these were not only beautiful words befitting a solemn moment. The meeting ended, The crews hurried to the aircraft parking lots and immediately began combat sorties. Our torpedo carriers and topmostoviki continued to strike at the enemy's sea communications. The operational summary that day reported: the aviation of the Red Banner Baltic Fleet continued to strike at enemy vessels in the Baltic Sea. Northwest of the island of Isle, our bombers and torpedo bombers in the afternoon of September 23rd sank 3 German transports and 1 SCR. To the west of Libava, Soviet pilots let down an enemy transport of 1000 tons displacement. In addition, sunk a German transport southwest of Vindava. Thus, a total of 5 transports and SCR were sunk. Yes, the word of our pilots was not at variance with the deed. Another time I would probably be happy with such weather: no wind, low clouds, the horizon dissolves in a blue haze. But that day I would have preferred clearer weather. The thing is that reconnaissance planes found an enemy convoy in the Gulf of Riga, and the regiment commander decided to strike with a group of 5 topmasts. I was the leader. The wingmen were wing commanders A. Zubenko and GGG Inikiv, pilots AY Sobolov and AD Kuzmin. And if the first 2 had already participated in attacks on the convoy, for the young pilots it was almost the first combat sortie. I was worried about them most of all, and although as usual we were carefully preparing for the task, everything seemed to have been discussed and agreed, I was worried after all. The weather conditions were quite difficult for them. Our route was over the territory of Estonia with an exit to the Gulf of Riga near the town of Pärnu. Under the wing lay the land that had been liberated from the occupants only yesterday. Everywhere one could see the terrible traces of war-destroyed neighborhoods of cities, the ground, cut by deep scars of trenches, broken and burned cars on the roadsides, fallen telegraph poles. All bridges were blown up. At some crossings, jams of infantry and military equipment. From above, we could see how sappers were putting order, letting the columns through the crossings. Only a few days ago we were flying over these places with all precautions. There was an enemy below. Now we felt a little calmer. We could not be afraid of enemy anti-aircraft gunners. At the same time, the possibility of the appearance of messers or Focke-Wulfs obliged, as they say, look out. The streets and houses of the city of Pärnu, which had not escaped destruction, passed under the wing. Here was the Gulf of Riga. Now we must find and attack the convoy. It's not so easy. Dense haze with visibility of only 2 to 3 kilometers. It is good that we had quite accurate data from our scout about the location of the target 2 hours ago. The convoy left the mouth of the western Divina and is moving in the direction of the Abensky Strait at a speed of 15 knots. Maybe it was better to go along the shore of the bay, but to the south, in the area of Einaza, there were big battles and we didn't want to take any unnecessary risks. We dodged to the bridge, closer to Ruknu Island, in order to take a course towards the enemy convoy. My navigator, Captain P.N. Sazonov, and the navigators of the wingmen were working hard. The most important moment had come for them. The meeting with the ships should not be unexpected. The radio gunners were listening to the air, carefully watching the air. Comrade Major, reported to me on the spew gunner radioist Sergeant Volkov, scout reports at the entrance to the Abensky Strait found another convoy, 2 transports and 3 guard ships. All right, we'll keep it in mind. The closer we come to the estimated place, the more tension increased. Ahead on the right ships, confidently reported Sazonov. I see ships. I see ships. Immediately, almost simultaneously, reported the wingman. They saw us too. Here and there, smoke caps of bursting anti-aircraft shells swelled up, dotted streams of automatic cannon trails stretched out. 5 warships guarded the only transport. Why such unacceptable luxury? Some kind of important cargo, then. I was only interested in the transport. It's our target. I made a turn to the left and gave the command to Yanikiv and his wingman pair to attack the transport. It was a pity to discharge all the airplanes on one, even an important target. After all, in the Abensky Strait were 2 more transports, and except for us there is no one to prevent them from leaving. However, the decision dictated by the situation and coincided with the natural desire to destroy in one flight as many enemy ships as possible could not be realized. We went to the ships from favorable course angles starboard, but Yanikiv and his wingman still walked next to me and did not think to attack. What is it, failure to fulfill the order? Or did not understand the command? The convoy flashed under the wing and instantly disappeared in the haze. Having made a fairly wide circle, I led a group on it from the left side. Again I gave the command couple to attack, and again the same picture. All the wingmen, pressed against me, went in a tight formation. I did not dare to circle without fighter escort near the coast occupied by the enemy. For the third time I led the group to the ships, commanded everyone attack, and went first. Only then, manoeuvring and firing at the guard ships, followed me wingmen. At the beginning of the attack, the enemy anti-aircraft gunners provided fierce opposition, but when we successfully covered them with bursts of our large-caliber machine guns, the counter-fire thinned considerably. 5 large-caliber bombs flew into a transport of 5,000 tons displacement. My bomb hit the bow, Kuzmin and Zubenko hit the center. The steamer broke apart and immediately sank. I was terribly angry when I returned to the airfield. How many righteous angry words I was preparing to rain down on the head of the leading pair, who almost did not derail our combat mission. But when all the planes rolled into parking lots and the crews gathered near me, everything became clear bad weather in the Gulf of Riga and too low visibility. Lack of horizon line over the sea constrained the actions of young pilots. Fear of losing sight of the leader, losing their bearings made them stay near me all the time. They did not dare to go forward. Apparently, I overestimated the capabilities of my wingmen and set them an impossible task. And yet the flight was not wasted. This was reassuring. Our planes did not have significant damage. A few bullet holes did not count. Interestingly, Kuzmin's plane was hit by only one bullet. It hit the gun of the gunner radiator and got stuck in his pocket without causing any damage. This bullet, in memory of the attack in the foggy Gulf of Riga, Kuzmin always carried with him as a relic, until a month later was killed with his crew in the battle over Libova. That same evening, when we were returning from the dining room, I met the mechanic of my airplane, NNA, Sterlikov. "And you were born under a lucky star, Comrade Major," he said half jokingly, half seriously. "Yes, I'm not sure. What makes you think so?" "A piece of anti-aircraft shell penetrated the floor of the cockpit right in front of your seat, and you were not even hit." "Well, maybe you're right," I laughed, and myself involuntarily recalled one memorable episode of my life. When the order came to second me to the front, my wife Olga Nikitichnaya and I could not decide for a long time where to live with our little daughters Toma and Galotka. "I will not stay in Sovgevan," she categorically declared. "Suddenly war with Japan will start, you will all fly away, and what will happen to us?" To some extent I shared her anxiety. Many families of servicemen had left much earlier for Siberia, closer to the Urals, Central Asia or the Volga region. I had to take my family with me when I left. Before leaving for the Baltic, I had to take a short retraining course at the 4th Naval Aviation School, where I had to master perfectly the IL-4 airplane for day and night flights. The program, of course, was accelerated and therefore very tense. We literally did not get out of the airfield for weeks. And so, when the training came to an end, I was unexpectedly called to the headquarters of the school. "The school is relocating to a new place, closer to the sea," told me the commander of our training squadron, Captain Ostroshapkin. "Land echelon with property and families are on their way, and you are assigned to overtake a group of airplanes. Crews are selected, you are appointed senior. Here's an order from the head of the school. Read it and sign it." "And when will you go to the front?" "Here, move the planes to Gudota, and as soon as the order comes from Moscow, we'll send them immediately. We won't delay." I pass on the rest from the words of my wife. At one of the intermediate stations, the train stopped for a long time, and the head of the train gathered all the servicemen for formation. "Having given all the necessary instructions and orders," he said in conclusion, "there is not a very pleasant message, comrades. At night, a platform with coffins was attached to our train. In one of them, the remains of our listener officer pilot Orlenko, who died in the crash. His wife and 2 children are travelling with us in the train, and she must be prepared for such sad news." He did not dare to tell the widow such terrible news himself, and entrusted it to 2 girls military servicemen who were travelling with her in the same carriage. Olga Nikitichna was stunned by the grief, but she was not frightened the responsibility, concern for her children, and, most importantly, the hope that the message was not accurate, that somewhere there was a mistake, that somewhere something was mixed up, gave her strength. "They say that my husband is dead." "But I don't believe it," she said to the train chief who came to the car. "I don't believe it. You will see, he will meet us in Ghouta." "I'm sorry, it's my duty to inform you," he replied and left. It is not difficult to imagine how agonizing, unbearably hard the remaining few days of the journey were for my wife. On the platform in Ghouta, when we and other pilots went out to meet their families, she picked up her daughters, ran to me, threw herself on my chest and froze. "What happened?" concerned asked Captain Ostroshapkin. "I confess, and me the state of my wife was incomprehensible. Not so long ago we parted. There have been separations and longer. Everything was explained by the head of the train, telling the story about the coffins." "What the hell? It's really an unpleasant story," exclaimed Ostroshapkin, restraining his irritation, and, turning to me, added cheerfully, "So you'll live a long time, Ivan Fiafonovich. You can go to the front, neither bullet nor shell will take you now." That shrapnel, which pierced the cabin, reminded me of the captain's prophetic words. Dawn was late. In fact, in nature, of course, everything was going its way, and the sun rose at a time determined by him in early fall, but to our room it could not get through. BRR, what a weather. Major Dobritsky shrugged his shoulders shakily, looking out our only window. "What's there?" I asked. For some reason I didn't want to get up. In Ukraine they would say Mryaka, it was grey all around, and the rain was falling like a sieve. As soon as we left the cabin, the wind blew our raincoats, splashed handfuls of fine drizzle in our faces, and we had to hold on to our caps with our hands to keep them from being blown away. It was either fog or grey wisps of clouds carried over the roofs, tangled and spread out in the crowns of trees. The weather is definitely not flying. Grigory Vasilievich shouted to me, because it was impossible to speak in the usual tone. God-awful weather. "And there is no visibility," I shouted back. But war often broke all the usual ideas and concepts. The harsh must, caused by the situation at the front, forced to abandon the stereotypes that had developed over time, to step over the cannons, to make the impossible possible. On that inclement morning of September 29th, the order came from the headquarters of the Fleet Air Force, one plane to conduct reconnaissance in the Gulf of Riga and Abensky Strait, to clarify the data on the movement of enemy ships delivering reinforcements and ammunition to the islands of the Moons Archipelago and Riga. "Who shall we send?" "Maybe Mesherin?" asked Captain Ivanov, mentally going over the names of commanders of other squadrons and the most trained pilots from among the former ferrymen. "No," after thinking for a moment, replied Sitikov. "I'll fly myself. With me, as always, Flag Navigator Zavarin, Gunner Radio Petty Officer Volkov." Zavarin. Ivanov and I tried to dissuade Fyodor Andreevich. In fact, do we have few pilots who are able to fulfill the combat mission, even in such disgusting weather conditions? Are there few old men who can do any job? But Major Sitikov did not like to abandon the decision. He only made one change. He took the regiment's chief of communications, Senior Lieutenant P.M. Cherkashin, as a gunner radiator. What was the reason for the replacement of the gunner radiator now remains only a guess. Volkov was known as an excellent specialist and more than once proved it in battle when he had to fight off fascist fighters. Perhaps played a role and personal sympathy of Major Sitikov to his chief of communications, which he did not hide. However, there was not a man in the regiment who would not sympathize Cherkashin, did not respect him for his past combat achievements. He fought almost from the first days of the war, had a lot of frontline experience, several combat awards, and this in the military environment is valued quite highly. All crews headed by Major Orlenko on my signal to be in readiness for immediate departure for torpedo strike, he ordered. So much for the bad weather. I escorted Sitikov to the plane. He did not immediately sat down in the cockpit, paused on the stepladder, and, as if saying goodbye, looked around the parking lots covered with a transparent veil. The airfield lived its usual life to Boston-hung torpedoes and bombs. Fuel trucks approached. Suddenly a loud machine gun burst rang out. "What is it? What's the matter?" Fyodor Andreevich turned around sharply. "Control check, Comrade Major," explained Captain Meshcherin, who emerged from the foggy mess, clearly trying to deflect the commander's anger from one of his subordinates. Weapons technician found a machine gun malfunction, fixed it, and fired a line into the air. "Well, acrobats," Sitikov said with a chuckle or a reproachful look, and climbed into the cabin. "At the parking lot you will shoot everyone." How could we have guessed that this unintentional machine gun burst would be the last military salute to our regimental commander and flag officer? Sitikov's airplane rose into the air and immediately disappeared into the foggy haze. It made no sense to stay on the airfield any longer, and I went to the communication station. Here was on duty at the radio station senior sailor Faina Mushitskaya, an excellent master of her craft. "How is the audibility?" "Everything is all right, Comrade Major." Mushitskaya kept in touch with Sitikov's plane until the meeting with the enemy convoy. "They attacked and sunk one. She retold us what Cherkashin reported from time to time. I was waiting for the order to take off the main group, but it was still not there." "Ours are coming back," said suddenly Faina. "They have already passed Riga. They are approaching Tallinn. Soon they will be here." And then, quite unexpectedly, the connection was cut off. Time after time the radio operator sent the regiment commander's call signs into the air, listening intensely to the mishmash of foreign conversations and electric discharges the commander's plane, did not respond. We were worried, and, as it turned out, not in vain. None of us saw neither Fyodor Andreevich Sitikov nor Grigory Antonovich Zavarin. Their airplane fell into the sea. The regimental commander and flag navigator were killed. From Pavel Makarovich Cherkashin, who was saved by a miracle, we learned the details of the tragedy that played out over the sea. First time we were flying in the clouds. We descended lower, there was a solid fog over the ground. Then tears began to appear in us. We flew over Rakvere airfield, near Tallinn, and rejoiced restoration works were in full swing here. It was worth keeping in mind in case of an emergency landing. Further on we set a course to Urban Strait. Again there was solid cloud cover. We had to go to a height of 4,000 to 5,000 meters. We started to make our way down already above the strait. We came out of the clouds at a height of about 500 meters. And very unsuccessfully right above the convoy of 4 transports and several guard ships. There was no place to descend for torpedo attack. Hitlerites opened a strong barrage. We had to abandon the attack and again went into the clouds. But in their breaks we noticed one convoy in the rain net, and a little later another one. Well, shall we call in our own? Decided to consult with the flag officer, the regimental commander. "I would not raise them," Fedor Andreevich objected Zavarin. "You cannot risk the personnel and material part. The weather, you see. I agree with you, the replenishment came including good pilots from the Polar Aviation and the Far East and ferrymen." "That's right. But navigators, Fyodor Andreevich, most of them came straight from schools. Theoretical training is not bad, but experience with a chicken sock. If it's hard for me, an old wolf, what can I say about them?" "No, I'd refrain from taking them up in such lousy weather." Sitikov decided to attack on his own. In the lead convoy chose a larger transport and descended. Bad weather this time proved to be an ally. Behind the rain net, on the background of Grey Sea Hitlerites found them with a delay, opened fire when it was too late. The torpedo hit the middle of the hull. The ship, scooping up water, fell on its side and began to slowly sink. Having turned around after the attack, took a course home. The meteorological situation did not improve. We flew along the coast of the Gulf of Riga. Already behind Riga the airplane was shelled by their own anti-aircraft gunners. The fire stopped only after the plane was signalled "I am your own." From Narva Bay we intended to turn to Volosovo. From there it was a short distance to our airfield. But on reaching land we met with a solid wall of fog. There was still enough fuel in the tanks, and having changed the route we were flying at a low angle over the Gulf of Finland. We contacted the radio station of the Fleet Air Force headquarters. Through it, they received an order to land on one of the airfields near Leningrad. Cherkashin joked. "This is great. We haven't been to the theatre for a long time. We'll go tonight." "Don't say GOP until you've jumped over it," Sitikov replied. "We still have to get to Leningrad." Cherkashin was about to object that they had already reached Leningrad, but suddenly he began to fall into a hole. Then a jolt, as if someone's giant hand at full speed grabbed and stopped the airplane. It was a strong blow to the face and legs, and complete silence. Cold water ran down the back of his neck. The plane fell and sank flashed a thought, and before he realized it, the instinct of self-preservation had already joined the fight for life. Before he realized what he was doing, he took a deep breath, reached down quickly, fumbled for the torn edges of a large hole in the hull of the plane, and squeezed through it with difficulty. He was pulled to the surface like a cork. Automatically he looked at his watch. It was exactly 17:00. The life jacket helped him to jump out of the depths. It was all he could rely on now. It worked perfectly. And now there was still a reaction in the box, with powder-warm air continued to flow into the vest. "What about Sitikov and Zavarin?" thought the senior lieutenant. He began to shout, to call by names and surnames, but the whitish darkness, which had fallen to the water, was silent. Cherkashin became hoarse, and only then he realized that it was useless to call further. If they were alive, they would have responded or at least groaned. But there was no sound around. It was time to think how to get out on his own. Should I try to swim to the shore? But where was the shore? I oriented myself. It seemed that a light, fresh breeze was pulling from the north, so to the shore to the south, to keep to the wind. But how far is it? I swam, saving my strength so that it would be enough for further. Something blackened ahead on the water. It turned out to be an oil tank from their crashed airplane. Wooden wreckage floated nearby. Leaning on them, I climbed up on the tank, and only then felt a sharp pain in both legs. I looked at my hands. The skin was peeled off all the way down to the cuffs of my overalls. He felt his sore nose. It was dangling from a flap of skin. How long had he been lying on the oil tank? He didn't know, and he didn't care about the clock. Pain, all-consuming pain in his legs, face and arms clawed at him with sharp claws. His body trembled, an irrepressible little shiver that made it impossible to think or forget. A boat motor rumbled in the distance. Straining his strength, he raised his head and listened. No, it did not seem. Engine. Rumbling. "Save me, came out by itself. It seemed that the sound of the engine was receding, fading away, and the fear of being alone again with the silent sea, with the pain paralyzing the body and will, made him scream again and again. At last they called out, "We hear, we are going to the voice." In the breaks of fog, Cherkashin saw a boat approaching. Fearing that they would not pass by, he slipped off the tank and swam towards it. A motorboat with a shalander in tow was approaching him. 2 women and an old man, who were in the shalander, pulled him out of the water, helped him take off his life jacket and laid him on the nets. The old man took off his sheepskin coat and covered the rescued man, inadvertently touching his feet. Infernal pain pierced the whole body. Cherkashin cried out and lost consciousness. "You've had it, brother," the old man said regretfully when Cherkashin woke up. "Your hands and nose are bad, and your legs are even worse. I'm afraid they are broken." In a small hospital, in a fishing village, a woman doctor immediately administered anti-tetanus serum, put bows on both legs, poured alcohol on a foot to keep him warm. "I did everything I could," she said. "You need an operation. Urgent surgery. You should go to the hospital, but I don't know how to get you there." The whole village helped. We found an old motorized truck, but without fuel. A lieutenant from the nearest communication post helped us. He gave us a couple of buckets of gasoline for the engine. We put hay in the back of the truck, carefully laid the wounded man, wrapped him with a tulip. Already at dusk we reached some medical unit 50 kilometers from Oranienbaum. But here Cherkashin was not accepted, only transferred to an ambulance and sent further to the naval hospital in Malaya Izora. The ride was adventurous. It was deep night, darkness at least an eye can poke out, and then, as a bad luck, the headlights failed. The nurse, dressed in a white coat, had to go ahead and show the way. So we reached the place by dawn. In an hour, Pavel Makarovich was already lying on the operating table. At the same time, we were informed where our chief of communications was. I immediately sent to the hospital the head of the regiment's chemical service, Captain I.N. Sazonov. "What do you hear about Sitakov and Zavarin?" asked Cherkashin, when, waking up after anesthesia, saw Sazonov at his bedside. "They're looking for them. No results so far, and they've only just heard about you." He didn't tell me that the body of our flag officer was in the morgue of the same hospital. He received several mortal wounds and a fractured spine. And the body of the commander was never found. The tragic death of the commander and flag officer shocked everyone in the regiment. The death of every man in the war is an irreparable loss for all who knew him. It is impossible to get used to it, but losing battle comrades almost daily, you begin to perceive another loss as an inevitable cruel regularity. However, this was a special case. 2 good men who were at the head of the team, who taught it, guided it, led it, were irrevocably gone. Sitakov belonged to the number of commanders about whom in the performance appraisal is usually written strict, but fair. Yes, he was really demanding in everything that concerned the practice and provision of combat work, perhaps even picky, but at the same time remained a cultured, intelligent man who did not allow loud disses, humiliating human dignity. This impressed people. It remains to add that he was an idol of pilots and navigators, a combat-honoured officer whose authority is unquestionable. In a word, everyone was worried. But sorrow is sorrow, and the war was not waiting, did not allow a day to suspend combat work. On my shoulders suddenly fell a new burden, the gravity of which, watching the regiment commander from the outside, I could only guess. I had so many responsibilities at once that it seemed that the day became shorter. They were simply not enough to have time to do everything. I kept hoping that someone would be sent instead of Sitakov, but a couple of days later I got a call from General Samokhin Major Orlenko to take command of the regiment. The order of appointment to the post will be sent by mail. I admit it was very difficult. And not only in the beginning, although in the beginning it was twice as difficult. Looking ahead, I will say that during 6 months of very intense combat work remained vacant my former position, Deputy Commander of the Regiment for Flight Training. Did not send and flag navigator of the regiment. This forced me and the staff to solve a lot of time and again arising problems. Especially time-consuming was the introduction into service of young pilots, navigators, gunner radiators, who arrived for replenishment directly from schools, where they were trained according to the reduced wartime programs. The commander of the Baltic Fleet Air Force constantly demanded to increase strikes by groups and pairs of torpedo carriers and topmast carriers against enemy communications in the Gulf of Riga, Abensky Strait, up to Libava to carry out mine laying. This is when the excellent business qualities of my deputies and assistants were fully revealed to me. I have already said above that I was lucky in my life to meet good people. In that difficult period it was especially bright. From the first days of my stay in the Baltic I had very warm relations with Nikolai Ivanovich Ivanov, the regiment's chief of staff, which then grew into a strong male friendship. You could always rely on this man, calm, balanced. He did not like unnecessary conversations, spoke briefly but succinctly. If he defended his point of view, his arguments were logical and well-reasoned. Perhaps he should not be considered a pedant. He was neither a dry man, nor a callous egoist, nor a bureaucrat, but neatness, typical of real staffers, was inherent in everything, even in his appearance. A snow-white strip of a cuff on a well-ironed tunic, always clean-shaven face, a strict parting on a balding head, an attentive look of big eyes from under overhanging bushy eyebrows. In my opinion, in a business environment, no one could talk to him about this and that, just for fun. He was a man of business. Nikolai Ivanovich arrived in the regiment after graduating from the academy and put a lot of energy into the formation of the staff and services, and then in the organization of combat activity. Sleepless nights, worries associated with failures and combat losses, it seemed, could not knock him out of the rut. He always remained poised, businesslike, performed his work accurately and on time. Not everyone could do such a thing. One night, during the period of busy mine laying, when the rumble of planes taking off and landing on the runway was almost unceasing, he came to me at the command post. "Do you have a cigarette?" I took a deep drag once and another, his eyelids swollen from lack of sleep, his cheekbones protruding on his stunned face. He was looking somewhere past me, and his gaze was absent, concentrated on something inside him, on some problem that did not let him go in these brief moments of rest. More than once, looking at him at such moments, I involuntarily thought what colossal possibilities nature has laid in this man. With the most active participation of NI. Ivanov, the instruction on additional exploration by our own forces of previously discovered marine targets was born in those days. This was caused by a number of circumstances. It happened that the data received by the pilots of the Reconnaissance Regiment, passing through various channels, distorted or delayed. A group of torpedo carriers, arriving in the area designated by the coordinates of scouts, convoy there sometimes did not find. It remained either the entire group to continue the search or return bombing on the spare ground targets. Such idle flights were not cheap, and unwanted encounters with enemy fighters were not excluded. It became clear it was necessary to conduct additional reconnaissance by our own forces. For this purpose, we allocated a single airplane with a well-trained crew. He was to accurately determine the location, composition and speed of the convoy, to transmit the data to the airfield without errors. This was not the end of his task. The scout met torpedo carrier strike groups on the approach, guided them to the target and recorded on photographic film the results of the strike. The task, to put it bluntly, very difficult. Its fulfillment required not only excellent piloting, impeccable navigational work, but also great courage. After several such sorties in the regiment, there were real ace scouts, who were often assigned to additional reconnaissance, the commander of the link, Lieutenant G. V. Poznik, the commander of the link V. A. Astukevich, with the navigator V. Astukevich, with navigator Lieutenant I.T. Lobukoy, gunner radio Sergeant Levshin, as well as Lieutenant V.D. Petrov, with navigator Lieutenant A. of Kornishkin, and gunner radio Sergeant Shvanov. I regret that my records did not preserve the initials of some of my fellow soldiers, whom I mention in the story. I did not find them in the archival documents, for which I sincerely apologize. How it all worked out for this remarkable trio of crews, but they proved to be excellent scouts. Thanks to this addition to our tactics, the effectiveness of torpedo boat strikes increased significantly. Flying away on a combat mission or on the next transportation of young pilots from the incoming replenishment, I left for myself on the ground Chief of Staff N. Ivanov. I left the airfield with a light heart because I knew in a difficult moment he will be able to make a decision that will be right. According to the staff schedule, Vasily Maximovich Smirnov was listed as a squadron engineer. In fact, this wonderful mentor and tireless worker performed the duties of the senior engineer of the regiment. I do not remember who called him once jokingly a walking technical encyclopedia, and, in my opinion, he was not far from the truth. Faced with technical problems or any malfunctions, engineers and technicians of squadrons preferred not to dig through instructions and forms, which moreover were in English, and went to Smirnov for advice and help. It was more reliable. He took it for granted, and even when he was busy, found time to explain to people what they could not understand themselves. Quite possibly, it was not only a character trait, but also became a habit after participation in several ferrying of Boston. Groups from Krasnoyarsk to Leningrad, when people literally on the move had to be taught the skills of maintenance and preparation of hastily learned equipment. It was Vasily Maximovich, together with two other leaders of the technical service of the regiment, Grigory Fedorovich Yakovlev and Vladimir Ivanovich Medvedev, led the conversion of not the best American attack aircraft into more or less tolerable Soviet torpedo carriers. In primitive front-line aircraft workshops, they, as I have already mentioned above, installed holders for torpedoes and bombs, equipped them with electrical and mechanical drop systems. In addition, on some machines in the front cockpit to the right of the pilot's seat, equipped navigator's workplace, for which in the frontal part of the fuselage cut a fairly large window for a view, which was then covered with organic glass. There were 5 such airplanes in the regiment: the regimental commander, his deputy for flight training, and 3 squadron commanders. If such a machine was shot down or failed for any other reason and could not be restored, instead of it was put in the workshops for refitting a new one. And the daily technical support of combat sorties in the conditions of the airfield, a very difficult matter. The great merit of VM Smirnov, GF, Yakovlev and VI Medvedev is that they were able to unite the technical staff to educate technicians, mechanics, motorists, diligence, honesty, a sense of personal responsibility for high-quality preparation of aircraft for flight, for maximum reduction of repair time of battle-wounded machines. There were many specialists in the regiment who worked miracles. Once one of the pilots, returning from a combat mission, got to the airfield on one engine. The second one was ruptured by a direct hit of a shell, and when the plane was rolling along the taxiway to the parking lot, it seemed that the motor was about to fall out. At the parking lot, the technician of the link, Lieutenant Technician MI. Maximkin looked over the plane, stood near the engine, and sighed heavily. Yes. If Maximkin expressed himself in such a way, then it really means that it's a dead end. Mikhail Ivanovich was a participant of the war with the White Finns. He had been at the front since the 42nd. He's seen a lot of things. How long will it take to repair it, Vasily Maximovich? I asked Smirnov, with whom we came to the parking lot together. At least a day and a half. You can see for yourself how it is. It's a long time. We should do it sooner. There are not enough cars. We'll do it faster, Comrade Major. Lieutenant Technician Maximkin answered for the engineer. We won't leave the airplane until it's done. It will be as good as new. After the war we'll have a rest. Said and done. Maximkin and his motorist worked many hours in a row without shifts. Food from the canteen was brought to them in pots directly to the parking lot. They found a lot of voluntary helpers among the mechanics who were not busy at that time servicing their airplanes. After 18 hours, the machine again went on a combat mission. Or, for example, Mechanic Petty Officer Vasily Tereshchenko was called by his first name and patronymic, and always with respect. It was considered that he was unlucky 4 times the airplane serviced by him returned with heavy damage, and once it was broken so badly that it would take at least 2 days to repair it. But Vasily Grigorievich did not agree, on the contrary, considered himself lucky after all. This machine flew the favourite of the regiment, the commander of the Link Junior Lieutenant Alexander Bogachev, on whose combat account was the most sunk ships. And if you get into the thick of it, then of course you also get hit. But no matter how badly he got hit, he always came back. And that time when it seemed that there would be no end to the repair, many people willingly volunteered to help. One mechanic on special equipment, whose name unfortunately I do not remember, adjusting to the size of the famous lines of Pushkin's poem Eugene Onegin, wrote such verses. Tell me, what force that broke you into splinters? Now work day and night, without taking a step away, patching and thinking to yourself. When will we repair you? With jokes and friendly banter worked more fun. Tereshchenko could and loved to work, and next to him simply could not stand idle. Repair time was halved, and exactly a day later Bogachev again lifted the machine into the air. Communists played a great role in uniting the technical staff, in fostering a high sense of duty among technicians, mechanics, motorists. One of them, Senior Lieutenant M.S. Markin, was known in the regiment as a man who worked for 3. And it was not an exaggeration. Being a link technician by position, Mikhail Sergeyevich used to personally inspect every airplane, advise the mechanic, or even show how to better prepare this or that unit, remind the young pilot about the execution and sequence of certain operations during the operation of the machine. And when, as it happened, the airplane of his squadron was shot down and urgent repairs were required, here Markin was tireless. He could not put up with the fact that the airplane remained out of service for a long time. He literally, as they call it, dug from under the ground. Strict exactingness, multiplied by personal enthusiasm of MS. Markin infected mechanics, motorists, armourers and other specialists, wounded torpedo carriers and topmostoviki, they brought to combat readiness in the shortest possible time. Having accepted the regiment, I took on a lot of new responsibilities. Now, by virtue of service necessity, had to be more often on the aircraft parking lots, on the repair sites, to get to know labourers' aviation, to delve into their needs, to meet their demands. I discovered a new world, new interesting destinies, revealed the spiritual richness of people. In this environment was a lot of officers, sergeants, soldiers who had a variety of talents. Here, at least, Senior Technician Lieutenant Tikhon Yemyanovich Yakubov. Creative thought never left this man. Above, I have already written about the fact that when preparing the aircraft for a combat flight, we lost most of all time in the suspension of bombs. If 250 and 500 kilogram bombs could be dragged to bomb hatches, lifted and fixed on holders by efforts of many people with the help of the simplest lifting devices, then the suspension of 1,000 kilogram bombs was worse. The bomb was brought by truck closer to the front of the airplane, unloaded by a crane on the ground and freed from the packaging. Then, to the mournful 1-2-2 take. And the entire mass of people available in the parking lot rolled the plane on the bomb so that it was between the wheels of the landing gear, under the bomb hatch. Even in dry weather, this thankless job required a lot of effort, and after the rain on the spreading ground and wet grass, it became twice as hard. Tikhon Yemyanovich Yakubov, whose duties included personally screwing the fuses into the suspended bombs, watched this unhappy procedure every day with heartache, but not only watched but also participated in it, because when the plane was pushed, every pair of hands counted. And the idea was born to make a high cart on which to bring the bomb directly under the fuselage. This ingenious idea came into the minds of many, because it lay on the surface and asked frankly, but the matter did not go any further. Because to carry on that cart was not a small child, and not even a bulky load for airfield needs, and a bomb weighing 1 ton. And even better too, how and from what to make such a cart? And the travel? What wheels can withstand such a load? And yet the idea ignited Yakubov. In rare leisure hours, more often in inclement weather, when flights were cancelled, or even in clear evenings, sacrificing another movie, he drew various variants of welded structures. He drew and tore them up to immediately start a new variant. Slowly he found and collected pieces of pipes, rails, channels. Finally, with the help of like-minded people and specialists in the field aircraft repair shop, the platform of the cart was welded and riveted. 3 wheels from broken fighter planes, which I found on the outskirts of the airfield, were also used. The effect exceeded all expectations. 2 bombs from the car was reloaded onto the cart, and only 4 specialists in aviation armament brought them to the holders of the aircraft. The time for arming was reduced several times, which made it possible to speed up the preparation of the machine for flight and free up people for other work. Senior Technician Lieutenant Pavel Gerasimovich Kirienko, before being assigned to our regiment, worked as a teacher at a military aviation school, where he taught a theoretical course and motor practice on aircraft engines. As his former students testified, he presented the material at the lectures clearly and lucidly. But fully committed to his favourite business, he from future aircraft mechanics required attention, diligence, solid knowledge and solid practical skills. Slackers and lovers, to rely on chance, were severely punished by him. And now, having appeared in 51 MTAP, Pavel Gerasimovich met many of his graduates. His appointment turned out to be just right. In the new team, where unfamiliar people were getting accustomed to each other, mastering new equipment, suddenly a group of people, who had a common past, albeit short but common, was formed by themselves, and a smart and clever leader became the head of this circle. Mechanics and motorists, naturally, were drawn to Kirienko. They were related by months spent together in the school, commonality of tasks solved together, solid theoretical and practical training of Pavel Gerasimovich. And, of course, no one wanted to fall foul of their former teacher, to show incompetence in matters of the past program or inability to perform certain repairs on the aircraft. Kirienko's very presence in the regiment had a beneficial effect on military discipline and on the quality of work of junior aviation specialists. Pavel Gerasimovich, initially appointed aircraft technician, had the opportunity, as they say, to see the fruits of his labour. His former cadets EI. Dobin and AP, Diev became mechanics and motorists. People diligent and conscientious, they under the direct guidance of Kirienko passed a good practical school, far beyond the limits of the school program. Some time after the beginning of intensive combat sorties and related losses, there was talk among the pilots about a significant, in their opinion, a design flaw of the Boston. The heating system of the cabins on it worked from a gasoline-air mixture supplied by the blowers of the engines. Perhaps in peacetime this design and would not cause complaints, but in conditions of combat flight, not once, after all, caught under anti-aircraft fire, flashed our torpedo carriers over the target and burning torch crashed into the water. Why? Heroically lost crews forever carried with them into the abyss of the mystery of the fire. And wasn't it this gasoline-air mixture that burst into flames when bullets and shrapnel hit the system? This gave us serious pause for thought. The system was a fire hazard, there was no doubt about it. In addition, bundles of pipelines and control cables to the mixture-burning furnaces interfered, hindered the work of technicians and mechanics in the inspection, and especially in the repair of machines. After a short debate in the engineering environment, discussion of all the pros and cons came to a decision to dismantle the heating system. PG, Kirienko together with EI, Dobin and AP, Diev was one of the first to undertake the task. Later, the dismantling was carried out by other technicians. The work was labour-intensive, difficult and, in general, at first completely unfamiliar, was performed on the machines one by one, without violating the plans of combat sorties. I remember one more characteristic case when deep theoretical training of PG. Kirienko allowed to get out of a difficult situation with dignity. The plane, which was serviced by technician Karp Vasilievich Surkov, returned from a combat mission thoroughly riddled with bullets and shrapnel from anti-aircraft shells. Fortunately, none of the crew received even a scratch. Surkov, who, it must be said, was also known as a master of his craft, having inspected the machine, was not very upset. It is true that it will take a lot of time, but there were no particularly complex damage. Except for one shrapnel damaged the bark cylinders of the propeller. It had to be removed and a new one installed. The whole crew worked for a long time. The propeller was finally installed, but the angle of attack did not change with the engine running. All efforts came to nothing. We had to start all over again. Surkov did not try his luck a second time, went to a nearby parking lot, where waiting for the return of his plane, covered with tarpaulin covers, dozing Kirienko and his assistants. Pavel Gerasimovich did not have to be asked twice. Together with Surkov, they looked through the instructions again and again, and still found the right option to install the propeller. Soon the serviceable airplane went on a combat mission. Mutual understanding, mutual assistance were our norm. If someone refused to help a comrade in a difficult moment, he would look like a black sheep, and would lose the respect of his comrades for a long time, which was very difficult to get back. Well, and those who sometimes were lazy, made mistakes, showing ostentatious effort to make dust in the eyes of the superiors present at the parking lot, were severely punished in the battle lists, in wall newspapers, which were posted here. While working on this story, retired Lieutenant Colonel T.E. Yakubov sent me poems mechanic Grigory Kryushkov, our homegrown poet, who blundered once, admitted self-critically. Where were you, Grishka, in a hurry? Why did you start the engines? Or were you afraid of Kukushkin? Or did the engineer Smirnov scold you? The engines were malfunctioning. The starter wouldn't start. The hydraulic system failed. And the propeller stopped turning. Such unpretentious poems, as well as witty signatures, under friendly caricatures made by the same Kryukov, caused laughter, lifted the mood, relieved fatigue. I catch myself repeating myself, but I can't help saying once again I was happy to work side by side with wonderful people in that difficult war year. In a short documentary story, it is simply impossible to tell in detail about many worthy comrades, to show them in action. May they forgive me for this. With love and gratitude, I always remembered the repair engineer Leonid Petrovich Zakharov, weapons engineer Anatoly Yakovlevich Kozelev, special equipment engineer Vasily Grigorievich Popov, Konstantin Mikhailovich Kozelev, chief of mine and torpedo service, mechanics Sergei Valentinovich Zarkov, Nikolay Alexeyevich Stelikov, Alexey Evseyevich Nikitin, Vladimir Alexandrovich Orlov, Ivan Ivanovich Mikhailov, and many others. Each of them, without sparing themselves, made a great contribution to the organization of combat activity of torpedo carriers, a contribution to the victory.